The council chamber was vast, built from a metal that shimmered like glass but never broke. Thousands of seats rose in circles around a glowing core of light, and in those seats sat the leaders of 100 different worlds. Some had skin made of stone, some had no skin at all, only light moving inside a clear body. Some looked almost human, but with too many eyes or too few fingers. They had gathered here for one reason: to decide the fate of a young, loud, and reckless species called humanity. At the center of the chamber stood Dr. Elena Voss, the chief ambassador from Earth. She wore a simple gray suit, and her hands were steady even though her heart was pounding. Behind her stood 3 other humans, chosen to represent the people of Earth. They had traveled for months to reach this place, carried by ships borrowed from a friendly alien trader, because humanity did not yet have the technology to cross such distances alone. Voss had spent her whole life preparing for this moment. She had studied alien languages, alien customs, alien laws. She believed with all her heart that humanity could earn a place among the stars. She believed in peace. She believed in proving herself. She did not know that the decision had already been made before she even entered the room. The speaker of the council was a tall being named Terran, with deep blue skin and a voice like rolling thunder. He looked down at Voss from his high seat and spoke slowly, as if explaining something to a child. "Ambassador Voss," he said, "the council has reviewed your species' history. We have studied your wars, your weapons, your hunger for expansion. In less than 200 years, your kind went from burning coal to splitting atoms. In less than 50 more, you built ships that can leave your solar system. This speed is troubling to us." Voss stepped forward. "Speaker Terran, with respect, every species grows quickly once it understands the universe. Humanity has fought wars, yes, but we have also learned from them. We built peace between our own nations. We are ready to learn peace between worlds, too." A murmur passed through the chamber. Some of the alien leaders nodded slowly, sympathetic to her words. Others did not move at all, their faces frozen in cold judgment. Terran raised a hand, and the chamber fell silent. "We do not doubt that your species can be peaceful, Ambassador, but we cannot risk being wrong. Your history shows a pattern. Humans solve problems with force first and diplomacy second. If we allow you into council space, and we are wrong about you, the cost could be the destruction of entire worlds. We are not willing to take that risk." Voss felt her stomach drop. "What are you saying?" "The council has voted," Terran said. "Humanity will not be granted membership. Furthermore, for the safety of all civilized worlds, humanity will be sealed beyond the outer rim. The hyperlane gates connecting your space to the rest of the galaxy will be closed. No council ship will enter your territory. No human ship will be permitted to leave it." For a moment, Voss could not speak. Around her, the other human delegates stood frozen in shock. This was not a warning. This was not a trial period. This was a sentence. "You're banishing us," she finally said, her voice shaking, not from fear, but from anger. "You are punishing us for crimes we have not committed. You are judging us not for what we have done, but for what you imagine we might do." "We are protecting the galaxy," Terran said simply. "This is not punishment. It is caution." Voss looked around the chamber, at the 100 different faces watching her, some with pity, some with indifference, some with quiet relief that the decision had been made, and they would not have to deal with the unpredictable humans after all. She thought of every argument she could make. She thought of pleading, of begging, of offering proof, treaties, anything. But she saw in their eyes that none of it would matter. The decision had already been written before she ever stepped onto the chamber floor. So instead, she straightened her back, lifted her chin, and said the only thing left to say. "You will regret this," she said. "Not because we will attack you. We will not. But because you are about to teach humanity that we can only rely on ourselves. And when you wall a people off from help, from trade, from friendship, you do not make them weak. You make them strong in ways you cannot imagine. One day, you will open that wall again, not because you choose to, but because you will have no choice." Terran studied her for a long moment. There was no anger in his eyes, only the calm certainty of someone who believed he was doing the right thing. "We hope you are wrong, Ambassador Voss. For your sake, so do I," she whispered. The vote was carried out within the hour. Across the galaxy, In star systems humanity had never even seen, ancient machines began to power down the hyperlane gates that connected council space to the edge of human territory. These gates were enormous structures, built long before humanity had even discovered fire, capable of folding space itself to allow instant travel between distant stars. Without them, a journey that once took weeks would now take centuries. One by one, the gates near human space went dark. On Earth, the news spread like wildfire. People had hoped for partnership with the wider galaxy, for access to incredible technology, for proof that they were not alone in the universe. Instead, they learned that the universe had looked at them and decided they were too dangerous to be trusted. Riots broke out in some cities, markets crashed, military leaders across different nations called emergency meetings, fearing that without council protection, humanity would be defenseless against pirates, raiders, or worse, hostile species, who might see an unprotected, banished humanity as an easy target. General Marcus Chen, a hardened officer who had spent his career studying alien fleet tactics gathered from old radio intercepts, stood before his country's leaders and said what many were thinking. They didn't banish us to protect the galaxy, they banished us because they're afraid of us. And now we have two choices. We can spend the next century begging to be let back in, or we can spend it making sure we never need their permission again. Across the ocean, in a private research lab, a brilliant young physicist named Dr. Amara Osei watched the news with a strange mixture of fear and excitement. She had spent years working on theoretical propulsion systems that the global scientific community had dismissed as too extreme, too risky, too far outside accepted physics. The Council's restrictions on advanced technology had quietly influenced human research for years, even before official contact, because scientists feared crossing lines that might offend the watching aliens. Now there was no one left to offend. No more rules, she murmured to herself, staring at her old notebooks full of crossed-out equations. No more permission. Meanwhile, in a tower overlooking a rebuilt city, a quiet, calculating man, known publicly only as the architect, watched the broadcast of Voss's failed appeal with sharp, careful eyes. He was not a politician. He was not a scientist. He was something rarer, a man who understood how to turn chaos into structure, fear into purpose, and broken nations into a single, focused will. He picked up his phone and made the first of many calls that would, within a year, begin uniting Earth's fractured countries under one banner. Dr. Elena Voss returned to Earth not as a failure, but as a warning made real. She stood before the United Nations, then before leaders from every major nation, and repeated Thren's verdict word for word. She did not soften it. She did not hide her anger. They believe we are too dangerous to walk among them, she told the gathered leaders. So let us stop trying to convince them otherwise. Let us spend our energy building something they cannot ignore. Something earned, not given. If they will not let us join their galaxy as equals, then we will build an empire that no one, not even the Galactic Council, can afford to dismiss. No one in that room knew yet how true her words would become. They did not know that within a generation, the very systems beyond the rim that the Council saw as a prison would become the foundation of mankind's greatest age. They did not know that the silence behind the closed hyperlane gates would not be the silence of a dying species, but the silence of a forge, hammering something new into shape. For now, there was only the dark, the isolation, and the long, uncertain road ahead. Humanity had been cast out, and humanity had begun, quietly, to build. The first winter after the gates closed was the hardest. People on Earth had grown used to a quiet kind of comfort, knowing that somewhere out there, a peaceful galaxy was watching, even if it had not yet welcomed them in. That comfort was gone now. The silence beyond the stars was no longer hopeful. It was empty and cold. Supply ships, that used to bring rare materials from friendly alien traders, stopped coming. Prices for fuel and metal shot up overnight. Colonies on Mars, which had relied on shipments of specialized parts to keep their life support systems running, suddenly found themselves cut off, forced to ration air filters and water purifiers meant to last only a few more months. On the outer moons of Jupiter and Saturn, where small mining colonies had been growing steadily for years, fear turned into desperation. Some colonies fought each other over fuel reserves. A few were abandoned entirely. their people evacuated back to Earth in ships that were never designed to carry so many passengers at once. News reports showed crowded docking bays and tired faces, children sleeping on cargo crates, families separated in the chaos. General Marcus Chen watched all of this from a military command center buried deep beneath the mountains of what used to be called Colorado. He had not slept properly in weeks. Reports came in by the hour. Pirate raids increasing near the asteroid belt, a colony ship gone missing near the edge of the solar system, riots in 3 different cities over food distribution. "We can't keep reacting," he told the assembled leaders during an emergency meeting. "We need a single command structure, one military, one set of laws, one direction. If we stay divided, the wolves outside our door will pick us apart one piece at a time." It was not an easy thing to ask. Nations that had fought wars against each other for centuries were now being asked to give up their armies, their borders, their old rivalries, all at once. Many leaders resisted. Some called Chen a dangerous man, accusing him of using the crisis to seize power. But the architect, the quiet man who had begun making calls the very night the gates closed, had already spent months building support behind the scenes. He did not ask for power for himself. He offered something simpler: survival. He met privately with presidents, prime ministers, and generals, showing them data, showing them the numbers on dwindling resources, showing them exactly how quickly humanity would collapse if it remained fractured. "You can keep your pride," he told one stubborn minister, "or you can keep your people alive. I am not asking you to choose between 2 good options. There is only one option here." Slowly, one by one, nations agreed to merge their militaries, their research programs, and their resources under a new banner, the Terran Compact. It was not a perfect union. There were arguments, betrayals, and moments where the whole fragile alliance nearly fell apart. But the threat from outside was greater than the old hatreds from within, and for the first time in human history, the entire species began moving in one direction. While politicians argued and generals planned, Dr. Amara Osei worked. She barely left her lab during those first months, fueled by coffee, stubbornness, and a growing sense that she was finally free to chase ideas the old scientific establishment had once called. Before the banishment, human researchers had quietly followed unspoken rules, avoiding certain types of energy experiments, certain reactor designs, certain weapons research, all out of fear of upsetting the watching council. Nobody had ever said these rules out loud, but everyone in the scientific community understood them. Cross too many lines, and humanity might lose its chance at acceptance. Now there was nothing left to lose. Osei's notebooks were filled with old designs for a fusion drive, far more powerful than anything currently in use. An engine that could, in theory, push a ship to speeds the Council itself rarely allowed lesser species to attempt. Her former colleagues had once warned her that pursuing such research was reckless, even dangerous. Now the Terran Compact handed her an entire research facility and told her to build it. "If it explodes," she told her new team on the first day, "at least it will explode doing something interesting." It took 6 months of failures. Reactors melted down. Test ships were destroyed in containment chambers. 2 researchers were injured in an early prototype accident that nearly cost a young engineer his life. But Osei did not stop, and slowly, painfully, the failures began teaching her team more than success ever could. By the end of the first year, the first working fusion drive prototype was tested in low Earth orbit. It was unstable, dangerous, and far from perfect. But it worked, and it was faster than anything humanity had ever built before. Meanwhile, the Terran Compact's new military, under General Chen's command, faced its first real test. Pirates, aware that humanity had lost its council protection, began probing the edges of human territory, testing for weakness. A raider fleet attacked a mining colony near the asteroid belt, expecting an easy victory against a species everyone assumed was now isolated and helpless. They were wrong. Chen had spent the past year reorganizing Earth's old, scattered defense fleets into a single coordinated force. He had studied old data on alien fleet tactics, intercepted over decades of careful listening, and combined it with new ideas his own officers were developing out of necessity. Where the pirates expected confused, slow-moving ships, they found a disciplined defense fleet that fought with brutal, coordinated efficiency. The battle was small by galactic standards, barely worth a mention in any official council record. But for humanity, it was proof of something important. They could fight, They could win. They did not need anyone's permission or protection to survive. News of the victory spread quickly across human space, and for the first time since the banishment, people allowed themselves a small measure of hope. The Terran Compact began investing heavily in shipyards, research facilities, and colonization programs, pushing outward into systems that the Council itself had once considered too unstable or too dangerous to bother claiming. This, more than anything, became humanity's greatest advantage. The Council's member species, cautious by nature after thousands of years of careful peace, avoided unstable stars, asteroid-heavy systems, and worlds with extreme conditions. They preferred safety. They preferred comfort. Humanity, born from a violent and unpredictable history, had no such hesitation. Where the Council saw danger, humans saw opportunity. Engineers built floating cities above the crushing storms of gas giants. Colonies sprang up on volcanic moons, protected by domes built from alloys Osei's team had developed during their fusion research. Mining operations pushed into asteroid fields too chaotic for Council ships to safely navigate. Fields that human pilots, trained from childhood on dangerous, unpredictable conditions back on Earth, handled with surprising skill. Dr. Elena Voss, no longer just a failed ambassador, but now a respected voice within the growing Terran Compact government, watched this transformation with a strange feeling she could not quite name. Part of it was pride, part of it was sorrow, knowing that this strength had been born from rejection and fear. And part of it was something like vindication, remembering the words she had spoken in that vast alien chamber. She kept a small recording of Thren's verdict, replaying it sometimes late at night. Not out of bitterness, but as a reminder of where humanity had started, and how far they still needed to go. They thought isolation would weaken us, she said during a public address marking the first anniversary of the banishment. They thought cutting us off from the galaxy would teach us to be smaller, quieter, easier to ignore. Instead, it has taught us to rely only on each other. It has taught us that the things we once waited for permission to build, we can build ourselves. The speech was broadcast across every human colony, from the crowded cities of Earth to the new domed settlements on the edges of known space. People listened, and for many, it marked a turning point. The fear and chaos of the first months began giving way to something steadier: purpose. The Terran Compact was still young, still fragile in many ways. Old rivalries occasionally resurfaced. Resources remained tight. The threat of pirates and rogue factions never fully disappeared. But beneath all of it, something new was taking shape. A unity born not from peace, but from necessity, hardship, and the stubborn refusal of a banished species to simply fade away. Far beyond the outer rim, the Galactic Council went about its business, mostly forgetting about the small, troublesome species it had sealed away. Other crises demanded their attention. Other disputes filled their endless council sessions. Humanity became little more than a footnote, a brief and unpleasant memory of a decision made and quickly moved past. They had no idea that beyond the silent, sealed gates, an empire was rising. 5 years passed beyond the sealed gates, and the silence on the other side remained unbroken. To the Galactic Council, those years meant little. 5 years was barely a breath in the long, slow history of their ancient civilizations. But to humanity, those 5 years were everything. The Terran Compact, once a desperate alliance formed out of fear, had grown into something far more organized. What began as a single command structure to manage a crisis had become a true government, with its own laws, its own currency, and its own vision for the future. Earth remained the heart of the Compact, but it was no longer the center of everything. New colonies, built in places the Council had once considered worthless or dangerous, were thriving in ways no one had expected. General Marcus Chen, now older, and carrying the quiet weight of years spent at war with pirates and rogue factions, stood on the observation deck of a massive shipyard orbiting Jupiter. Below him, through the thick reinforced glass, he could see the skeletal frame of a new warship taking shape, larger and more advanced than anything humanity had built before. Sparks from welding drones lit up the darkness like tiny stars. "How long until completion?" he asked the young engineer beside him. 8 months, sir," she replied. "Maybe less, if Dr. Osei's new alloy holds up the way the tests suggest." Chen nodded slowly. 8 months. 5 years ago, a ship like this would have taken a decade to design, let alone build. But necessity had taught humanity to move faster than anyone, even the humans themselves had thought possible. Dr. Amara Osei's research had not stopped after the success of the first fusion drive. If anything, that early success had only pushed her further. Her team, now numbering in the thousands, had developed reactor designs that produced more power with less fuel, alloys that could withstand both the crushing pressure of gas giants and the violent heat of close solar orbits, and weapons systems built around principles that, had the Council still been watching, would likely have triggered alarm across a dozen worlds. She no longer worked from a single cramped lab. She now oversaw an entire research division within the Compact's growing government, but she still preferred spending her time on the production floor rather than in meetings. She liked watching ideas become real things, watching drawings on a screen become solid metal floating in space. "You used to tell me these designs were impossible," her old colleague, Dr. Rajiv Mehta, said one afternoon, watching a test reactor hum quietly in its containment chamber. He had worked with her since the early days, back when their research had been quiet and cautious, careful not to attract unwanted attention from a galaxy that no longer existed for them. "They were impossible," Osei said, smiling faintly. "Under the old rules. Funny what happens when nobody's watching to tell you no." The Compact's expansion was not limited to weapons and warships. While the military grew stronger, ordinary life across human space was changing just as dramatically. Colonies that had once struggled to survive now flourished. New farming techniques, developed out of necessity when supply lines from old trade routes vanished, made it possible to grow food in environments once thought unsuitable for agriculture. Floating habitats above the storms of gas giants became bustling cities, home to millions who had been born without ever seeing Earth's sky. Children grew up hearing stories of the Council's judgment, not as a tale of despair, but as the origin story of their entire civilization. To them, the banishment was not a punishment. It was the moment humanity stopped waiting for permission and started building its own future. Among the new generation was a young woman named Sarah Voss, daughter of Dr. Elena Voss. Sarah had been only a child when the gates closed, too young to fully understand what her mother's failed plea before the Council had meant. Now grown, she worked as a pilot for the Compact's exploration division, charting the edges of human territory and pushing into systems no one had ever mapped. It was during one of these expeditions that Sarah's small scout ship picked up something unusual: faint energy readings near the edge of what used to be Council-controlled space, close to one of the old, dormant hyperlane gates. She reported the readings back to command, expecting little interest. Instead, the response came quickly and urgently. General Chen himself ordered a small fleet to investigate. What they found, drifting silently near the dormant gate, was the wreckage of an old pirate vessel, the same kind of raider ships that had been testing human defenses for years. But this wreckage was different. Scattered across its hull were markings that matched none of the smaller pirate factions humanity had encountered before. After careful analysis, Compact intelligence officers identified the markings as belonging to a larger criminal network, one with loose but real ties to certain corrupt elements within Council space itself. It was the first solid evidence that the Council's wider galaxy, the one that had cast humanity out for being too dangerous, was not nearly as orderly or peaceful as it claimed to be. Crime, corruption, and exploitation existed there too, simply hidden behind layers of bureaucracy and tradition. This discovery quietly shifted something in the Compact's leadership. For years, there had been a small but persistent hope among some officials that the Council might one day reconsider its decision, that diplomacy could still repair what had been broken. That hope began to fade, replaced by a clearer, harder understanding. The wider galaxy was not a peaceful paradise humanity had been unfairly excluded from. It was simply another flawed, complicated place, no better and no worse than the one humanity was building for itself. "We don't need their approval," Chen said during a private meeting with the Compact's governing council, the wreckage data displayed on the table before them. "We never did. We just thought we did." Elena Voss, now serving as one of the Compact's senior diplomats, despite there being no one left to practice diplomacy with, listened quietly. She had spent years carrying a quiet hope that humanity's exile might someday end through negotiation. Looking at the evidence in front of her now, she finally allowed herself to let that hope go. "Then let's stop building a request," she said. "Let's build an answer." It was around this time that the first real test of humanity's growing strength arrived. not from a small group of opportunistic raiders, but from a larger, organized pirate fleet, the same network whose markings had been found on the wreckage near the dormant gate. This fleet had grown bold, believing the rumors that humanity remained weak and disorganized behind its sealed borders. They gathered their ships near a young compact colony at the edge of human space, a mining settlement called Kepler's Reach, expecting an easy raid against an undefended target. They had badly underestimated what humanity had become. General Chen, alerted to the fleet's movements through a network of scout ships Sarah Voss had helped establish along the border, did not send a small defensive force. He sent the newly completed flagship, built using Osei's latest reactor and alloy designs, alongside a full battle group assembled from 5 years of careful planning and relentless production. The pirates arrived at Kepler's Reach, expecting scattered, outdated defenses. Instead, they found a wall of disciplined, coordinated firepower waiting for them, ships moving with a precision and speed that none of their old data on humanity had prepared them for. The battle that followed would later be remembered as the moment the wider galaxy first truly understood what had been happening beyond the sealed gates. It was short, it was decisive, and it ended with the pirate fleet either destroyed or fleeing in scattered, broken formation, leaving behind wreckage that would eventually make its way, through smugglers and rumor, back into Council space. At Kepler's Reach itself, the colonists who had feared annihilation only hours earlier now stood outside their domed settlements, watching the wreckage of their attackers burn silently against the dark of space. Children who had grown up hearing stories of humanity's exile now had a new story to tell, one of strength rather than survival. Sarah Voss, watching the battle's aftermath from her scout ship, felt a strange mixture of pride and unease. She thought of her mother, standing alone before the Galactic Council all those years ago, warning them that banishment would only make humanity stronger. She had been right, but Sarah could not shake the feeling that this victory, however necessary, marked the beginning of something the wider galaxy would not be able to ignore for much longer. She was right to feel that way. Far beyond the outer rim, in the quiet, orderly halls of Council space, reports of the battle at Kepler's Reach began to spread, first as rumor, then as confirmed fact. For the first time since the gates had closed, the Galactic Council turned its attention back toward the small, troublesome species it had banished and largely forgotten. What they would soon discover would shake the foundations of everything they believed about humanity and about themselves. The report that landed on Speaker Thren's desk should have been routine. Council intelligence officers filed hundreds of such reports every cycle. Small skirmishes, pirate losses, minor disturbances along the galaxy's edges. Most were read once and filed away without a second thought. This one was different. Thren read it twice, then a third time, his deep blue skin darkening slightly, the way it did when he was troubled. The report described the destruction of a large, organized pirate fleet near a colony called Kepler's Reach, in the territory the Council had sealed off years earlier. What troubled him was not the destruction itself. Pirates were destroyed all the time. What troubled him was the description of the ships that had done the destroying. According to the report, the human vessels had displayed weapons output, shield strength, and maneuvering speed that should not have been possible for a species the Council had cut off from advanced technology 5 years earlier. The analysts who compiled the report had flagged it as likely exaggeration, the kind of inflated rumor that often spread through smuggler networks. Thren was not so certain. He called for a meeting of the Council's senior advisors, a smaller, quieter gathering than the full chamber sessions, reserved for matters that required careful handling before being presented to the wider body. "We banished them because we feared what they might become," Thren said, standing before a holographic display of the report's data. "It appears we may have been wrong about how long that would take." One advisor, a calm and methodical being named Doran, from a species known for careful, deliberate thinking, studied the data with narrowed eyes. "The numbers could be wrong. Pirate networks exaggerate their losses to save face. It's possible the humans simply got lucky. It's possible," Thren agreed, "but it would be unwise to assume so without verification. I propose we send a reconnaissance fleet, nothing aggressive, simply enough ships to observe human space and report back accurately." The proposal passed with little resistance. Most of the senior advisors saw it as a reasonable, cautious step, Exactly the kind of careful action the Council had always prided itself on. Few of them considered that the same caution that had once seemed wise might now be dangerously outdated. Command of the reconnaissance fleet was given to a young, ambitious officer named Captain Vorel, a member of a proud warrior species that had joined the Council generations earlier after a long history of military conquest. Vorel had grown up hearing stories of his ancestors' battles, stories that had little relevance in the peaceful, regulated galaxy he now served. He saw this mission as an opportunity, a chance to prove himself against a species everyone still quietly assumed to be primitive and disorganized. Sensors only, Thren reminded him before departure. Observe, record, and return. Do not engage. Understood, Speaker, Vorel replied, though something in his tone suggested he considered the order more of a suggestion than a command. The reconnaissance fleet entered human space through one of the old, dormant hyperlane gates, reactivated briefly for the mission before being sealed again behind them. What Vorel and his crew found in the days that followed shattered every assumption the Council had carried for the past 5 years. Instead of a scattered, struggling species clinging to survival, they found a vast, organized civilization. Shipyards larger than anything in many Council systems orbited Jupiter and Saturn, churning out warships at a pace that defied easy explanation. Colonies thrived in conditions the Council's own engineers would have considered uninhabitable. Floating cities above gas giant storms, settlements built into volcanic moons, mining operations weaving through asteroid fields too chaotic for Council ships to safely enter. Vorel's sensors recorded fleet movements, weapons tests, and energy signatures that matched nothing in the Council's databases. The technology was unfamiliar, clearly developed independently, without the careful, standardized guidelines the Council had spent millennia establishing among its member species. It was rougher in some ways, but undeniably powerful, built by a species that had been forced to solve problems through trial and error rather than inherited wisdom. He should have returned immediately, as ordered. Instead, pride and curiosity convinced him to push deeper into human territory, eager to gather more impressive data to bring back, certain that no human force could detect or challenge his advanced reconnaissance fleet. He was wrong. Compact border defenses, built over years of dealing with pirate incursions, detected the unfamiliar fleet almost immediately. General Chen was alerted within hours. Unlike the pirate raiders the Compact had grown used to fighting, these ships carried configurations and energy signatures that matched old, half-forgotten data, fragments humanity had gathered decades earlier, through careful listening, before the banishment, back when Earth had still hoped to be welcomed among the stars. Council ships, Chen said quietly, studying the data in the Compact's central command center. After 5 years, they finally come to look. The Compact's leadership debated how to respond. Some argued for caution, for allowing the reconnaissance fleet to observe and leave peacefully, hoping it might lead to renewed diplomatic contact. Elena Voss, despite having let go of her hope for reconciliation, still argued for restraint. Let them see what we've built, she said. Let them report it honestly. That alone may be enough to change things, without a single shot fired. But Captain Vorel, eager to prove himself further, made a decision that ended any chance of a peaceful resolution. Spotting a Compact patrol near one of the outer colonies, he ordered his fleet to intercept and issue a formal demand, insisting the human vessels stand down and submit to inspection, framing it as standard Council procedure for territories under review. The Compact patrol, commanded by a young officer who had grown up entirely within the years of banishment, knowing nothing of the careful submission Earth's early ambassadors had once practiced, refused. He contacted command for instructions, and the response came back swift and clear from General Chen himself. Hold your position, do not submit to inspection. If they open fire, you are authorized to respond with full force. Vorel, frustrated by the refusal and unwilling to return to the Council with nothing more than sensor readings, made the fatal decision to demonstrate his fleet's authority. He ordered a warning strike, weapons fired close to the human patrol's hull, intended to intimidate rather than destroy. It did not intimidate, it provoked. The Compact patrol returned fire immediately, and within moments, distress signals reached the nearby battle fleet stationed to defend the colony, the same fleet that had crushed the pirate forces at Kepler's Reach months earlier. General Chen, anticipating exactly this kind of escalation, had kept reinforcements close to the border since the first sensor readings of the reconnaissance fleet had come in. The battle that followed was brief, brutal, and utterly one-sided. Voral's reconnaissance fleet, designed for observation and minor policing actions rather than full combat, found itself facing warships built specifically for war, commanded by officers who had spent 5 years fighting increasingly dangerous pirate threats along a hostile, unprotected border. The Council ship's shields, advanced by the standards of a galaxy that had not seen true conflict in centuries, buckled and failed under concentrated human firepower, developed through Osei's relentless, unrestricted research. Voral's flagship was the last to fall, its hull breached, its systems failing, distress signals broadcasting uselessly into the silence of human space. In his final transmission back toward the dormant gate, recorded automatically by his ship's systems even as the vessel broke apart around him, Voral's voice carried a tone of stunned disbelief rather than fear. "They were never primitive," he said. "We were wrong. We were so wrong." The wreckage of the Council reconnaissance fleet drifted silently in human space, a stark, undeniable answer to 5 years of uncertainty. General Chen ordered the wreckage documented thoroughly, every detail recorded, every system analyzed. There would be no ambiguity, no room for the Council to dismiss what had happened as exaggeration or misunderstanding. When the news reached Council space, carried back through the same dormant gate by a handful of surviving escape pods, the response was not the calm, measured caution that had defined the Council's decision 5 years earlier. It was shock, confusion, and for many, the first real fear that the choice made in that great chamber might have been a catastrophic mistake. Speaker Thren stood once again before the full Council, this time delivering news far different from the calm verdict he had once given Dr. Elena Voss. The chamber, usually filled with measured discussion and careful debate, fell into uneasy, restless murmuring as the details of the battle were presented. "We banished them believing isolation would limit their growth," Thren said, his voice heavy with the weight of what he now understood. "Instead, we gave them 5 years to build, uninterrupted, unrestrained by any law or guideline but their own necessity. We removed the only thing that might have kept them cautious, contact with the rest of us. And in doing so, we created exactly the kind of unpredictable, powerful force we feared most." Doran, the advisor who had once dismissed the early reports as exaggeration, spoke quietly into the stunned silence that followed. "What do we do now?" Thren did not have an easy answer. For the first time in longer than most in that chamber could remember, the Galactic Council faced a power they did not fully understand. One they had created themselves through their own caution, now standing just beyond a gate that no longer felt nearly secure enough to contain it. Beyond that gate, humanity did not celebrate the victory with arrogance or aggression. Instead, under Elena Voss's quiet guidance, the Compact began preparing something the Council had not expected. Not an invasion, but an opening. It was time, she argued, for humanity to step forward, not as a banished species seeking forgiveness, but as an equal, ready to define the terms of contact on its own. The dormant gate near the edge of human space had not opened in 5 years, not since the night the Council sealed it shut and turned its back on Earth. Now, for the first time, it began to glow again, not because the Council had reactivated it, but because human engineers, working from data salvaged out of Voral's destroyed reconnaissance fleet, had finally learned to open it themselves. It had taken months of careful work. Dr. Amara Osei's team studied the wreckage piece by piece, reverse engineering the ancient gate technology that the Council had always guarded so carefully, technology so old that even the Council itself barely remembered how it had first been built. When the gate finally flickered to life under human control, there was no celebration in the control room, only a quiet, heavy silence as everyone present understood what it meant. Humanity was no longer locked behind a wall built by someone else. The wall was theirs now, to open or close as they chose. Elena Voss stood in the observation deck above Earth, watching live feeds of the gate activation, alongside General Chen, Dr. Osei, and her daughter Sarah, now a senior officer within the Compact's growing fleet. None of them spoke for a long moment, each lost in their own memories of the long, difficult years since the banishment. 5 years, Voss finally said. 5 years ago, I stood in their chamber and told them they would regret this decision. I didn't know it would take this long, I didn't know what it would cost us to get here. It cost us everything we used to be, Chen said quietly, and gave us everything we are now. The compact's leadership debated carefully what to do next. Some, still cautious after years of hardship, argued for keeping the gate closed, for continuing to build in isolation, safe from a galaxy that had once judged them so harshly. Others argued for immediate, forceful expansion, using their newfound strength to claim territory and respect through power alone. Voss argued for a third path, one that reflected everything she had learned since that day in the council chamber. We do not need to hide anymore, she said, and we do not need to conquer to be respected. We simply need to show them exactly who we have become, clearly, honestly, without fear. Let them decide how to respond to that. We control the gate now. We control the terms. Her argument won out, though not without difficulty. The compact prepared a small diplomatic envoy, escorted not by a massive war fleet meant to intimidate, but by a modest, disciplined honor guard, meant to demonstrate confidence rather than aggression. Voss herself would lead it, alongside General Chen, and a recording of the full battle at the border, undeniable proof of what humanity had built. The arrival of the human envoy in council space sent ripples of shock through every level of galactic society. Word had already spread of Voral's destroyed fleet, but rumor was one thing. Seeing humans walk calmly into the heart of council territory, escorted by their own ships, requesting an audience rather than begging for mercy, was something else entirely. The council chamber, when Voss entered it this time, felt different. The same 100 species sat in their high seats, but the atmosphere had changed completely. Where once there had been calm, distant judgment, now there was uncertainty, even something close to fear in many of the watching eyes. Speaker Thren looked older somehow, though Voss knew enough about his species by now to understand that the change was not physical, but something deeper, the weight of a decision he had come to regret. Ambassador Voss, he said, his voice careful and measured, you return to us after a long absence. I do, Voss replied, standing tall, her voice carrying none of the desperate pleading that had marked her last appearance here. Though I do not return as the same person who left, and humanity does not return as the same species you banished. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. She simply played the recording, the full footage of the battle that had destroyed Voral's fleet, presented without exaggeration or apology. The chamber watched in heavy silence, as the footage showed, in clear and undeniable detail, exactly what the council's caution had inadvertently created. When the recording ended, Voss spoke again. 5 years ago, you told me that humanity was too dangerous to be trusted, too unpredictable to be allowed among the stars. You banished us out of fear, believing isolation would limit what we could become. Instead, you gave us 5 years of uninterrupted growth, free from any restriction but our own judgment. You did not make us smaller. You made us exactly what you feared, but you also taught us something you did not intend. She paused, letting her words settle across the chamber. You taught us that we do not need anyone's permission to survive, to grow, or to matter. We built an empire not because we sought conquest, but because we had no other choice. And now, we stand here, not to seek revenge for what was done to us, and not to beg for forgiveness either, but to offer something far more practical, a choice. We can be your enemy, a power you cannot control and barely understand, or we can be your equal, a partner in this galaxy, rather than a threat sealed away behind a wall that no longer holds. The chamber erupted into murmurs and quiet debate among the assembled species. Some, particularly those from older, more militaristic cultures, argued cautiously for continued containment, fearful of what an unchecked human empire might eventually become. Others, more pragmatic, recognized that the choice Voss described was not really a choice at all. Humanity could no longer be contained, only negotiated with. Doran, the careful advisor who had once dismissed early reports of human strength, rose to speak. We made our decision 5 years ago based on fear of what humanity might become. That fear created a self-fulfilling outcome. I believe it is time we make a different decision, this time based not on fear, but on the reality standing before us. Thren studied Voss for a long moment, the weight of the entire chamber's uncertainty resting on his next words. Finally, he spoke. The Council will reconsider its previous ruling. Full membership remains a complex matter, requiring careful negotiation. But the banishment, the closed gates, the isolation, That ends today. Humanity will be permitted to engage with council space freely, as a sovereign power, not as a subject awaiting judgment. It was not the full acceptance Voss had once dreamed of, all those years ago, standing nervous and hopeful before this same chamber. But it was something far more valuable. Respect, earned rather than granted, built on strength rather than pleading. The news spread quickly across both human space and the wider galaxy. On Earth, and across the dozens of colonies the Compact had built during the long years of isolation, people celebrated, not because they had finally been allowed back into the Council's good graces, but because they had proven, decisively, that they had never needed that approval to begin with. General Chen, watching the celebrations from Compact Command, felt a strange mixture of pride and quiet caution. He had spent his entire career preparing for war, and now, finally, that long, difficult preparation had secured something rarer than victory, a future where war was no longer necessary, at least not for now. Dr. Amara Osei returned to her research with renewed purpose, no longer driven purely by survival, but by curiosity and ambition now matched with genuine resources and freedom. With the gates open, new technologies and ideas began flowing both ways, as other species, intrigued rather than threatened by humanity's resilience, sought trade and partnership rather than conflict. Sarah Voss, now leading exploration efforts into newly accessible regions of the galaxy, often thought of her mother's words from years earlier, about isolation making humanity stronger rather than weaker. She understood now, more than ever, the strange and difficult truth behind that idea. The very banishment meant to limit humanity had instead forged something the galaxy could not ignore. Elena Voss remained in her role as humanity's senior diplomat, though her work now looked very different from those early, desperate days of pleading for acceptance. She negotiated trade agreements, defense treaties, and cultural exchanges with dozens of species who, only a few years earlier, would have dismissed humanity as nothing more than a minor, troublesome footnote. Standing once more in the Great Council chamber, now as an equal rather than a supplicant, she sometimes thought back to the exact moment the gates had first closed, the fear and uncertainty of that long winter, and the slow, difficult years that had followed. None of it had been easy, none of it had been fair. But out of that hardship, something extraordinary had been built. The Terran Compact did not become the largest power in the galaxy overnight, nor did it seek to dominate the very council that had once cast it aside. Instead, it grew steadily into something the galaxy had rarely seen before, a young, restless, endlessly adaptable civilization, respected not because it demanded respect, but because it had simply, undeniably, earned it. The old hyperlane gates remained open, no longer symbols of exile, but of a hard-won, unshakable strength. And far beyond them, humanity continued building, not out of fear anymore, but out of the quiet, steady confidence of a people who had once been told they did not belong among the stars, and had answered, in the end, by building among them anyway.